Today on Ag News Daily.
We've got enough uncertainty when we think about the globe and the trade picture that I think anything that adds another more demand source to that picture is a good thing for a grower.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. Michelle, we are just a few weeks away from Christmas. Do you have all your Christmas shopping done?
Haven't even started, but that's okay. It's Christmas season with the snow, and so if that can melt after Christmas, that would be really appreciated. What about you?
I agree. I like a white Christmas, and then after that, I want all the snow to go away and it to be 60 degrees again. So.
And football season is ending, and I know Tanner teased it last week. There was some news for Iowa football, but on my alma mater, UW River Falls, is a small Division III school. They're in the quarterfinals this weekend, so go Falcons.
Yeah, Iowa State got a new head coach. That was the big hubbub last week, and Iowa State played last night in a basketball game. Very close game, but I'm sure we've got a lot of Iowa and Iowa State listeners and fans that have been watching all of that unfold. But Michelle, let's talk about what's unfolding this week in the weather. Multiple Clipper systems are moving across the country this week, bringing snow and Arctic air. Multiple snowfalls are happening across the Midwest, including here in the state of Iowa, and another round of bitterly cold Arctic air will settle in for a short stretch, with some areas struggling to reach zero before warmer temperatures return next week. The storm track will shift north into Canada through those scattered showers could linger. In the Corn Belt, a fresh surge of cold air has already arrived, especially across Minnesota and the surrounding states. High temperatures there will stay below 20 degrees, and deep snow cover remains across the northern Corn Belt, reaching into central Iowa and northern Illinois and Indiana. Farmers have now endured more than 2 weeks of cold, windy conditions, and livestock stress has increased as well. Sounds like we might get a little reprieve next week, but yeah, certainly here it's been chilly. Haven't wanted to go outside. The dogs haven't even wanted to go outside, which is shocking.
Negative wind chills is what I'm hearing this weekend, so I'm excited for spring already. As we also hear, we heard a lot of ag policy news this week. The U.S. Department of Agriculture will provide $12 billion in one-time bridge payments to help farmers manage temporary trade disruptions and rising production costs. President Donald Trump announced a support package earlier this week during a White House event with cabinet members and lawmakers. Up to $11 billion will fund the Farmer Bridge Assistance Program, offering broad relief to row crop producers. Payments are expected by late February of next year, and commodity-specific rates will be released by the end of this month. USDA is urging farmers to verify their 2025 acreage report by December 19th. The remaining $1 billion, though, will support commodities outside of the FBA program, including specialty crops and sugar. Though industry reaction has been mixed. While many growers welcome the short-term relief, they say the funding won't fully offset losses tied to low commodity prices, weaker export demand, and higher input costs. Some also argue the support does little to address long-term structural challenges such as ongoing trade barriers. The USDA says producers will learn their exact payment rates the week of December 22nd, and yeah, that's coming up, and definitely a lot of news on the ag policy front this week.
Well, Secretary Rollins in the USDA rolled out a new $700 million regenerative pilot program to help farmers adopt practices that improve soil health, water quality, and long-term productivity. The announcement came earlier this week as Secretary Rollins and the Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. jointly made that announcement. The effort ties into HHS's Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy, with new research underway on how regenerative agriculture supports public health. The program is designed to cut red tape, expand access for new and beginning farmers, and strengthen the long-term resilience of America's food and fiber supply. NRCS will administer the program through a streamlined outcome-based conservation model using EQIP and CSP funding. USDA says farmers will now be able to apply for both programs through a single application at their local NRCS office, eliminating past administrative hurdles. NRCS Chief Aubrey Betancourt says the agency's goal is to make it easier for producers to plan and implement whole farm regenerative practices that support higher yield and healthier soil over time. And I had a few farmers text me this week with that announcement, Michelle. They are excited to see the administration get behind some new regenerative practices and programs. Now the big question mark is just 45Z.
Something we've also been watching these past few months is the USDA reorganization. Deputy Secretary Stephen Badin says the department's major reorganization, moving more than half of its Washington, D.C. based staff to 5 regional hubs, will be completed by the end of 2026. About 2,000 employees are expected to relocate to those 5 locations. But according to reports from Civil Eats, several provisions in the new agriculture funding bill could slow implementation. Those provisions require congressional approval before USDA can close NRCS, rural development, or farm service agency offices, or move programs, employees, or projects. Public response that they've been collecting these past few months to the proposal has also been largely negative. 82% of more than 14,000 public comments submitted during USDA's review period oppose the reorganization. Despite that pushback, USDA Deputy Secretary Stephen Badin told AgriPulse newsmakers this week that the department still plans to complete the relocation effort within the next 2 years. That report is over 30 pages that they had some of those comments, and so just diving deeper into those, that commentary was super interesting.
Well, in other USDA headlines, Secretary Rollins has announced significant updates to the federal crop insurance program aimed at cutting red tape and expanding access to risk protection beginning with the 2026 crop year. The new Expanding Access to Risk Program, or EARP, maybe is the acronym pronunciation, final rule modernizes longstanding policies and responds directly to producer feedback. Key changes include removing insured requirements from the 1 in 4 prevented planting rule, easing eligibility while still requiring proof that the land was planted or harvested in one of the previous 4 years. And USDA says the updates are designed to make it easier, not harder, for farmers to protect their operations. The rule also simplifies paperwork and reduces administrative hurdles. For example, farmers switching approved insurance providers will now be able to submit production reports directly to their new provider, helping to avoid confusion at renewal times. Secretary Rollins says the changes underscore USDA's farmer-first focus and encourages producers to contact their local crop insurance agent or visit the Risk Management Agency website for details on how the updates may affect their coverage.
During that same gaggle that happened at the White House earlier this week, President Trump also made comments about major farm equipment manufacturers to lower their prices. Bloomberg reports the president accused companies like John Deere of driving up machinery costs through what he called unnecessary environmental add-ons. He said his administration would give manufacturers permission to remove many of these requirements, calling them, quote, nonsense that makes equipment more expensive and more complicated for farmers. President Trump said EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin will help craft new, less restrictive emission standards for farm machinery. Speaking at that White House roundtable, he argued current emission rules have pushed equipment prices too high. Under the administrative's plan, manufacturers would be expected to reduce prices as environmental restrictions are rolled back, though specific details of that policy have not been released quite yet.
Well, we did get some movement this week on sustainable aviation. The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Coalition is praising a new House bill aimed at strengthening the future of biofuels. Executive Director Allison Grab welcomed the introduction of the Securing America's Fuels Act, which would restore the full value of the Sustainable Aviation Tax Credit and extend the broader 45Z Clean Fuel Credit through 2023. Supporters say the bill arrives at a pivotal moment as demand for low-carbon fuel grows. Lawmakers from both parties say the legislation would boost rural economies and give producers certainty. Senator Mike Flood of Nebraska says the U.S. is on the cusp of the next great biofuels revolution, and the bill will support jobs across rural America. Others say strong long-term incentives for sustainable aviation fuel will benefit farmers for innovation and strengthen local communities. And I know a lot of farmers are going to be excited. Our friend Mitch Hora at Continuum Ag is certainly going to be excited by this news as well. Well, Michelle, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by another quarter point this week, bringing the federal funds rate down to the range of 3.5% to 3.75%. Economists say the move likely reflects concerns about a softening labor market. The non-farm unemployment rate rose to 4.4% in September, and with government shutdown delays, newer jobs data hasn't been available. The rate cut is welcome news for farmers planning to borrow in 2026, providing a little bit more moderation after two previous cuts. The Fed's decision was aimed at supporting the weakening job market, but it didn't come without debate. Persistent inflation and missing economic data led to the most divided vote among the Fed's rate settling committee in 6 years. So we'll see how that continues to progress forward. A new study shared this week says California is using outdated assumptions when calculating the land use impacts of soy-based biodiesel and renewable diesel. Commissioned by the Clean Fuels Alliance America and Farmers Fueling the Future, the analysis by Life Cycle Associates finds that California's indirect land use change, or the ILUC values, don't reflect modern farming practices or current global market data. CARB's last update came in 2018, relying on older economic models and information that predates major gains in yields, changes in trade patterns, and improved carbon stock measurements. Researchers say the updated science shows significantly lower ILUC emissions for soy-based fuels. Clean Fuels board member and Iowa farmer Dave Walton says today's producers are meeting the rising demand for low carbon fuels through better yields and responsible management, not by expanding farmland. He says it's time for CARB to modernize its land use approach so it reflects today's agricultural reality.
Well, it's something we're continuing to watch here on the podcast. Will E15 continue to get to the finish line? The American Farm Bureau Federation says it might come here this month yet. President Zippy DeWalb told Brownfield that the policy is, quote, really close, quote, but says farmers will still need to push Congress to put the higher ethanol blend into statute. He says commodity groups are unified and discussions with petroleum groups continue despite the American Petroleum Institute withdrawing its support earlier this fall.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has extended the deadline for China's purchases of U.S. soybeans from December to the end of February. He says China remains on pace to meet its pledge of 12 million metric tons for the 25-26 marketing year, though actual purchases to date total just about 2.25 million tons. Analysts estimate total sales could be 3 to 4 million tons, still well below pre-trade levels. The U.S. Trade Representative has launched a Section 301 investigation into China's compliance with the Phase 1 trade agreement, and Farm Bureau officials emphasize that international trade is critical to farmers, accounting for roughly one-fifth of their income, and that unfulfilled promises and tariff risks take a real toll. As the third largest buyer of U.S. food products, China's actions are being closely monitored to ensure a fair market for American farmers and ranchers.
Well, also with the U.S. Trade Representative, we are also preparing for the mandatory 2026 review of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, with a focus on strategies to strengthen the North American food supply chain. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative recently held 3 days of public hearings in Washington, D.C. late last week, hearing from more than 1,500 stakeholders, including manufacturers, retailers, and industry groups. The overwhelming majority support maintaining free trade, highlighting the importance of Canadian and Mexican suppliers to U.S. operations and exports. Trade officials say several options are on the table as the review begins. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer says the agreement could be revised, renegotiated, or even exited, noting that economic relationships with Canada and Mexico differ in labor, trade flows, and legal frameworks. The USMCA, which replaced NAFTA during President Trump's first term, is set to expire in 2036, but can be extended through the review process, giving policymakers a chance to strengthen trade rules for farmers and other industries across North America. So just a short update from last week when we reported this, some more information that we learned.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given conditional approval to Merck's Exalt Cattle CA1, the first topical drug approved in the U.S. to treat and control New World screwworm and cattle fever ticks in cattle. The parasiticide can be used in beef cattle 2 months or older and in replacement dairy cattle under 20 months. Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller says it's a landmark achievement for livestock health and a win for cattle producers, providing modern science-backed tools to protect herds. While New World screwworm has not yet been detected in the U.S., a third isolated case was reported last week in Nuevo León, just 120 miles south of the border.
Well, a new CoBank report released this week says ample grain supplies and low prices will continue to pressure markets in 2026, though rising biofuels production and improving export conditions are boosting optimism that prices have passed their cyclical lows. Demand for U.S. grains and oilseeds is expected to strengthen, while animal protein and dairy sectors see gains from efficiency improvements and strong consumer demand for protein-based products. Rising revenues and falling feed costs are supporting producer confidence, though expansion may remain limited. The report also points to fading tariff concerns and the growing impacts of AI on the U.S. economy, with productivity gains expected despite market speculation about a potential stock bubble. Economic fundamentals remain strong, with steady wage growth, low employment, and falling inflation providing support for continued growth. Meanwhile, rising electricity demand, rural data center investments, and evolving food and beverage trends will shape rural economies and agriculture markets into 2026.
Well, Michelle, as Christmas is right around the corner, you likely already have your Christmas tree purchased if you got a real one this year. But the Real Christmas Tree Board says most wholesale growers didn't raise prices for the holiday season. Executive Director Marcia Gray tells Brownfield that 84% of tree farms surveyed, which supply up to 2/3 of U.S. Christmas trees, said prices will stay the same, and some have even lowered them. Gray says farms are absorbing slight cost increases, and about a third of all growers expect to sell more trees this year than last year. Gray also notes that there are dozens of tree varieties, with firs being the most common, and regional differences for shoppers. She said if you want a local tree and you're in Arkansas, Alabama, Texas, or Georgia, you're going to be buying a cypress. She says, adding that each variety has its own fragrance and characteristics. Oregon, North Carolina, and Michigan remain the top Christmas tree growing states. And we've never bought one as a couple, but we always had real trees growing up. Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, same. It's always the smell and the different spirit. So I'm looking forward to one day having a real tree again. But this week's interview is with the Plant-Based Products Council. They just released its 2025 Consumer Trends Research, now in its 6th year, showing strong public support for plant-based options. According to the report, 71% of Americans are familiar with these products, 85% view them favorably, and most use or purchase them at least monthly. To talk more about that and what it means for agriculture is Executive Director for the Plant-Based Products Council, James Glueck, to talk a little more about that BioPreferred program.
Well, bio-based is often a topic that is discussed here. Joined here by James Glueck. He is the Executive Director of the Plant-Based Products Council. So first, James, tell us a little bit about the council.
Absolutely. Happy to be visiting with you about what we do. The Plant-Based Products Council is about 5 years old. We're a trade association based in Washington, D.C., and our focus is really on federal policy related to, turning things like U.S. corn and soybeans and sugar into products that we all use every day. Think about cleaning solutions in our homes. Think about diapers that we put our kids in. Think about some of the, inputs on an automobile. So chemicals, a whole range of products. As we think about the council, we are feedstock agnostic. So I mentioned corn, soy, sugar, seaweed, you name it. If you can grow it and turn it into a product, we're focused on those issues. And we also work across the value chain, which to me is pretty exciting. It's not just manufacturers and those issues but we've got growers, folks who, farm in Iowa and elsewhere, that are a part of our membership as well. Large merchandisers who kind of buy grain from growers, and then folks of all sizes on the manufacturing side. Large manufacturers in the chemical space, smaller startup types who have a bright idea in a laboratory. So kind of fun to think about just the range of innovation that's happening in the space.
Talk to us a little bit about the history of bio-based. Certainly it's being discussed a lot about today, but 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, it is. It's very popular today. Consumers, demanding these types of products for sure. But this is an industry that really dates back to kind of the late 90s, early 2000s. USDA's BioPreferred program, one that a lot of folks look to for that stamp of approval and endorsement. It's started in the 2002 Farm Bill. And so you look at that wasn't just yesterday anymore. So we've got a pretty well-developed industry in some cases, but it's constantly growing and changing with new products, new innovations, which is what makes it a lot of fun. Thinking about that early day of history, a lot of the focus was on, how do we find new ways to kind of use grain, right? There was an interest at the same time on the energy side and the biofuel side, but this is the industry that goes just beyond that. So, packaging, plastics, chemicals, that you name it, it can probably be done.
Give me some kind of scope of BioPreferred products that are on the marketplace. Certainly, other markets for corn growers are ethanol, but, tell me about the scope.
Yeah, the scope is really broad. USDA's BioPreferred program has a catalog that's available on the website, and it's got, 100 plus different categories that are available for procurement in the federal government in many cases. So you'll find things there that are cleaning solutions. You'll find products that are, I mentioned kind of inputs to automobiles, tractors, those components, foams. You've got folks who are looking at the defense sector as well, right? Thinking about from a national security perspective, not relying on other markets for these types of products, growing them here at home. There's opportunity there as well. And then something that I think is exciting, you think about, lubricant products, oil-based products. Think about soy as a feedstock there. So there are folks who are making like a machine oil, an engine oil, kind of a chain oil lubricant that can be used back on farm equipment as well. So kind of a full circle there. You grow it on the farm, turn it into these products here at home, and then use it on the farm as well.
Is there a lot of growth potential for the market? Is there a lot of things that are happening that can be challenges to the industry?
Absolutely. I mean, growth is really the focus of what we do, thinking about federal policy. How do we encourage domestic manufacturing, biomanufacturing here to grow that demand for growers? As we think about that growth potential, right now, according to USDA's number, the industry is about $489 billion today, and it has a kind of range of jobs in about 4 million. So a pretty large, kind of opportunity as we sit today. But as we look forward, the sky is really the limit. Globally, there is a ton of interest in this space. And I think that's a real risk we have in the U.S. is falling behind our competitors. I think about places like Europe, from a kind of demonstration scale, kind of growing facilities. They've got about 489 facilities that are kind of structured to help someone take an idea from a laboratory and grow it into a commercial operation with real demand for the input. Here in the U.S., we have, less than 25 of that same type of facility. So really a need for investment in that innovation infrastructure. Thinking about places like Asia and China in particular, back in the early 2000s, they made this industry, biomanufacturing, a real priority. And they've been investing billions in this infrastructure that the U.S. needs to really play catch up on.
And maybe we should take a step back as you look at the word bio. How do you define bio? Because I think oftentimes we talk about it, but what is it actually?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. From where we sit, we think about the plant side of things, right? But broadly described, bio is, kind of animal and plant feedstocks that are turned into products that are used in daily life. So a pretty broad definition there.
Mm-hmm. And as we look here at the policy level, Q4 here going into 2026, what are you watching weekly and maybe advocating for at the Capitol?
Yeah, like many growers and probably folks that are tuning in, the Farm Bill is something we've been watching and looking at for several years now. And then Congress recently acted and extended that through 2026 in many cases. So things like the BioPreferred program we talked about have been extended with authority, but not with funding. And so that's something we're very much focused on, trying to make sure that the program not just has the authority to operate, but the resources to kind of maintain the catalog, to maintain the promotion of that mark so that consumers have real clear transparency in what they're buying. So that's a big focus. The loan programs at USDA as well, with an extension there, provide a resource for folks who are looking to grow and scale up a facility. Beyond just the traditional ag space, there's a lot of activity happening across government, right? The defense space we talked a little bit about, but the National Defense Authorization Act, this whole conversation about guns and butter, ag versus defense, bioeconomy fits in both. So there's language in the current NDAA bill that would really help accelerate some of the DoD type demand for these types of products. And then the other area I'd say we're always focused on is thinking about things like the tax picture. Are there ways that we can use tax policy to help make sure that, someone who's looking at putting bricks and mortar and steel in the ground here in our rural communities to build a new refinery or to expand their facility, that they're able to do that in a way that also is economical, and the tax code is a good way to think about that.
Now, you mentioned the Farm Bill. It was supposed to be written in 2023. Now we're 3 years extended into 2026. Tell us about, from your point of view and perspective, will we get a typical Farm Bill? Is that what you're advocating for? Or are you, knowing that there's going to be uncertainty to do this every year?
Yeah, no, I think we are still firmly in the camp. We've got folks that we work with on Capitol Hill, great champions across geographies, whether it's in Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, Kansas. We've got, folks who are very interested in these issues. Minnesota. I shouldn't have started listing states because you're going to leave somebody out, but a lot of folks, different sides of the aisle, House and Senate, that have, a couple of bills that we're watching in that Farm Bill space. The ag Biomanufacturing and Jobs Act is the one that improves things like the kind of the BioPreferred program, some data issues, terminology in the space for consumer transparency, and then the Ag Bio Act is one that is focused on infrastructure. And I think I say this because those are all written in a way that would be a 5-year extension to provide industries like this real clear certainty, just like a farmer really needs that certainty, not just 1 year at a time, but with a little bit of a longer lead. Companies do too. And so I think we're still committed to that 5-year picture. I will say I spent 10 plus years working on Capitol Hill on the Ag Committee in the Senate, very familiar with Farm Bill policy in the past. And we have seen anything but a typical path here in the last several years, to your question. We saw parts of it extended, some of the conservation extended several years ago, some of the Title I and crop insurance challenges addressed here more recently. And so I think as we look forward, we do have leaders in both House and Senate that are committed to providing some longer term certainty, and we're behind that effort.
Now, with specifically the USDA's BioPreferred program, to clarify, it is re-extended to that Farm Bill. Is there any kind of certainty that it will, continue to be in that language of the Farm Bill within, that 5-year threshold?
So I think, we were encouraged by the House action last year, because of bipartisan action in the committee, extended, modernized, improved the program, funded it, and the bill didn't go anywhere on the Senate side last year. And so it's a new Congress this year. The chairman in the House, was pretty excited about getting a bill done in September, end of the year. And then we had a government shutdown. So that just pushed the schedule back. So they have extended that authority for 1 year, just the 1 year certainty. But like I said, but without the funding side. So you might be able to do it, but if you don't have the budget to do it, I think that's something that's a concern for us.
Now, on the consumer side of things, you just released some research here at the beginning of December and in that time frame. Tell us a little bit about that research.
We did, and I appreciate the question because this is an industry that is really responding to consumer demand. And I think it's exciting anytime you can marry kind of what we do on the farm, kind of what we do on the manufacturing side with what consumers are actually asking for, right? This isn't government saying this is what you should do. This is a consumer saying this is what we want. So we've done consumer research for about 5 years. And what we've seen really is when you ask U.S. consumers, do you like bio-based products, plant-based products? 70+% of them say they are familiar with these products. They know what they are. There's an awareness there. And when you ask how favorable they are to them, 80+%, 83% say they're favorable. So that's a pretty strong demand, I think, that folks really do want to buy these types of products. Cost is always a conversation, right? When you're thinking about something new, novel, different. And consumers say they're willing to pay more as well. But when I say pay more, I mean pennies and not dollars, right? Because those costs are things that we all struggle with and deal with in our budgets. And so we've got about 1 to 20% more is kind of what consumers are willing to pay. Thinking we've got a whole host of data that folks can dig into on the demand side. But I think there's also a couple of questions we asked that to me in the ag space are pretty interesting. One of those is kind of designed to understand, do consumers tie these types of products back to agriculture and the farm? And when asked a question like that, they say, 63% of them say they're a lot more favorable about these types of, bio-based cleaners and products and textiles, materials when they think about them tied back to agriculture, to farmers, and to the ag community. So I think that's a really strong tie and something that I'm encouraged by and our members are encouraged by. And then the last thing I'd say, we're a policy advocacy organization. So we always want to know, like, how do folks out, constituents, stakeholders to folks in Congress and in the administration, how do they feel about policy in this space to help us grow and really kind of develop a U.S.-based industry? In well over 70%, doesn't matter if you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, or whatever, say they support U.S. investment, U.S. supportive policies in this area. So very encouraging on the policy front as well.
Now, we really talked about a few different elements in our conversation, but if a farmer is listening to this, why should they care that you are doing this work in this, bio-based industry?
Yeah, and I think from a farmer's perspective, growing up around agriculture, it always comes down to economics, right? And so I think that's what this industry is about as well. And so what we're really talking about are new markets, new opportunities for use of U.S. corn, soy, and whatever the feedstock they grow is. And so from a farmer's perspective, anytime you can think about one other option when it comes time to harvest or time to sell, you're in a better spot. We've got enough uncertainty when we think about the globe and the trade picture that I think anything that adds another more demand source to that picture is a good thing for a grower.
Now, if a farmer is listening, how can they help you? What can they do, and maybe perhaps talk to their neighbor about?
Yeah, no, I think farmers broadly are very supportive of this space, very excited about these types of market opportunities. But I think helping tell that story, right? Helping debunk some of the myths about what agriculture is and isn't. We always talk about, we need to tell the story more. But I think that it's not just about kind of food and feed, but there's also a whole host of material options for a grower. I mentioned growers are already supportive. I think about some of the grower-funded research, folks like National Corn Growers who have a radical kind of investment challenge where they look at new startup, bright ideas in the laboratory and invest resources to help them grow into commercial scale. I think about in the soy industry. We've got to think about 8 soy states have invested in a laboratory. It's in Ohio, Arable Labs, that does exactly that, working with folks on the demand side to develop a product that consumers are looking for. So farmers can tell that story as well.
Well, thank you for joining us here, James. Just to close out, we did really touch upon a lot, but BioBase, just wrap it up, give a plug of why BioBase is truly, perhaps a marketplace for growth for growers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think when you think about the benefits of this industry, some might highlight the kind of benefits on the environmental side, resources, water, emissions, if you track those things. Others might think about the economic benefit, right? The new market for growers, jobs in our rural communities. Or the challenges on waste management. We didn't talk much about that. But I'd say at the end of the day, BioBase offers so many different options across that value chain, whether you're on the farmer side, the manufacturing side, or the consumer, that it's got a really bright future for us.
Well, thank you so much for joining, James.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, just one of the many conversations we continue to bring you here on Ag News Daily. But Delaney, what's happening in markets this week?
Well, we had a WASDE report earlier this week, Michelle. It was a non-event, non-report, as January really is the one that traders and farmers are going to be watching to see how yields get updated from this year. USDA's December WASDE report did, however, lower the 25-26 corn ending stocks to 2 billion bushels, still a large number. While soybeans and wheat were unchanged, corn exports also were raised to about 3.2 billion bushels. And corn and wheat futures this week really traded sideways following that report. Soybeans did try to inch a little bit lower this week while watching markets in South America, weather, and potential Chinese soybean demand, but likely that lion's share going to our South American counterparts. U.S. oilseed production is slightly higher due to cottonseed, and season average corn and wheat prices remain between that $4 to $5 per bushel range, while soybean prices have been left unchanged. Several flash sales were also announced earlier this week on our weekly export sales report. China was a buyer of about 264,000 metric tons of soybeans, and an unknown buyer booked about 226,000 metric tons, and another 186,000 metric tons of U.S. corn. So that is a quick update looking at the markets for this week, Michelle. We only have one more show left, I think, before the holiday season. So be sure, folks, to stay tuned with us and catch us next week before we end our year together.
Yeah, what a year 2025 brought us, and then to 2026.
Absolutely. But Michelle, what do you say with that? We let the people go.
Let's let them go.